Freedom of expression and opinion, transparency and access to information are prerequisites for democratic societies, where the rule of law applies and where everyone's human rights are respected. And these rights are also a prerequisite for innovation, debate, scrutiny, and accountability, all valuable ingredients of a free and open society. This year, we celebrate 250th anniversary of the Swedish Freedom of the Press Act, the first of its kind in the world. And the significance of Freedom of the Press Act cannot be overestimated. The Act abolished censorship of all printed publications and guaranteed public access to official documents and the right and opportunity to engage in political debate. The Freedom of the Press Act has played a pivotal role in the development of the modern Swedish society. We are, though, and that's why we are here today, acutely aware of the many challenges and difficulties facing the rights and fundamental freedoms that the Act set out to safeguard and which are increasingly under attack around the world. Today, in many places around the world, we see a repressive media climate where disinformation and propaganda go hand in hand with deteriorating security and working conditions for journalists. Confidence in the media is decreasing, and the space that human rights defenders and advocates of democracy have to work in is shrinking. At the same time, repressive laws targeting journalists are being adopted in many states. Being a journalist is often a dangerous profession to engage in, especially when trying to do so in the most risky of contexts. The risks and dangers to female journalists are often higher than those encountered by their male counterparts. Women face not only the implicit dangers of hostile environments, but of cultural and societal prejudice as well. As we face a worsening working environment for female journalists, it is as important as ever to defend the human rights and freedoms we sometimes take for granted. Our gathering here today, and a warm welcome to all of you, is a celebration of all journalists who refuse to be silenced, with a special focus on female journalists. Journalism is one of the professions that is most exposed to threats, and that is especially true for female journalists. They are intimidated and harassed, not only for being journalists, but also on grounds of their sex. From a global perspective, violence against women is one of the most prevalent human rights violations. Despite the amount of attention given to the issue, it is regrettably as common as ever. This constitutes not only a threat to women and qualitative journalism, but also a freedom to freedom of expression, equality, and democracy. We must never forget that democracy thrives when a plurality of voices are heard. Unfortunately, many voices are under attack. Female journalists can offer a different news agenda and different insights into regular news stories if they are allowed to operate and work without fear for their safety and well-being. The plague of the violence against women is perhaps even more present in cyberspace. Attacks on female journalists online are overwhelmingly sexual in nature, including rape threats, cyberstalking, blackmail, and disinformation. While the opportunities offered by the internet vastly outweigh the challenges, there are still a number of issues to deal with. Technology has brought us many improvements, and we are dependent on the internet in all aspects of our lives. The internet has enabled easier and faster communication, as well as borderless connections between people and the free flow of ideas and empowerment of individuals. But information technology has also blurred the line between private and public, professional and non-professional, and has been used to threaten and keep female journalists living in fear. The internet has put women in the line of fire to an even greater degree. Online harassment is more dangerous because of its ability to spread around the world, and because once it's online, it stays online. From a Swedish perspective, we are convinced that the only way forward is to promote, protect, and defend freedom of expression and opinion. We need to work continuously on different levels to ensure that these issues are never forgotten or ignored. Journalism is a very effective means of countering disinformation and combating incitement to violence and hatred. It can be a strong antidote against all types of prejudice. Allow me to mention a few examples of concrete action moving the issue forward. Last year, UNESCO adopted a resolution on safety for journalists presented by Sweden. Sweden provides broad support to journalists and human rights defenders as part of our development cooperation. Sweden is a driving force in implementing the UN Action Plan for the safety of journalists and combating impunity. Safety of journalists is also a recurring feature in the UN Human Rights Council as well as the General Assembly. Through the Swedish Development Agency and the Swedish Institute, we help fund journalist training and provide support to independent media outlets and investigative journalism. On the occasion of the 250th anniversary of the Freedom of the Press Act and the Public Access to Information and Secrecy Act, the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs has launched a communication campaign highlighting the benefits of freedom of expression and opinion and transparency. And I feel truly privileged to be in this room with all of you, and of course a special welcome to all the journalists that have come from all over the world to join us and share their stories and take part in this significant event. We must keep in mind that doing the right thing is not always easy. It can come at a high price. But in our continuous global struggle for freedom of expression and opinion, as well as for democracy, we must not deviate from this path. And again, thank you for everything that you are doing in your everyday lives and professions. Thank you for participating in this discussion, and good luck to all of you. Thank you for listening.
Well, of course, thank you very much to the Foreign Minister for also accepting to take few questions. And I'm going to be asking you a little bit about Europe, Minister. You sit also with the other foreign ministers of Europe, and we all know if this effort that you are talking about, if it is not made to be global, and let's start with Europe, then it will not really have any meaning. So are you in touch with other European counterparts? Are you discussing this? Where are you going with this?
I think that this has recently, of course, ended up on the, and moved up the agenda of the European Union as well, because we've seen, I might say, for the first time, really serious attempts to reduce freedom of speech and
Yes.
also hinder the work of independent media in Europe. And maybe this is something that we never thought we would have to actually address and keep on the European Union agenda, but it has been growing in attention and also seriousness. And I would say that this is also something that already the previous government started to work on to make sure that we can put it on the political agenda of the European Union. Not that we have many instruments. We don't have sort of the legal framework and instruments to be very effective in doing so. But we've started with an organized dialogue with those countries where we see that there are breaches of the main principles and values set out in our treaties. And this is how it starts, and also with the help of the Council of Europe. This is how we address it as of today. But I think this will continue to be a concern, and also something that we really have to look at how to sharpen our instruments, or get the right instruments to be able to intervene. Because this has to do with the sheer value base that
Absolutely.
we... And
Are you planning on legislating any laws that could be perhaps adopted across the European Union?
Well, I think this is the discussion that will finally come. If we see that this is not enough to actually stop these attempts of closing down media outlets, or silencing journalists or criticism, and then it means also that we will have to really look at what else we need.
Sure.
But today we don't have sort of the directives that we can use immediately and
yes, which needs to
apply.
be really done very quickly. One thing that really struck me, we were in a group of journalists all this morning, and we found the discussions extremely useful. But one of my colleagues, a Swedish colleague, she told me that she was rather depressed and that she was scared because she's subjected to intimidation. Her mailbox is full of hate mail, etc. In Sweden itself, and another colleague said somebody is actually going to court. They were taken to court. So are you also in Sweden itself, are you looking at strengthening these laws and perhaps making them more prevalent to what we are experiencing today?
I think you always have to be willing to look at whether the legislation is enough, or if it is something wrong with the implementation. But I think this is also a phenomenon that has been sort of increasingly visible lately, and that has to do with the use of internet and social media, where this hate speech and the attacks, very vicious attacks on especially women journalists, or those that are just public figures and strong profiles in Swedish society. And of course we see it as politicians as well. And so what was meant to be a channel for better communication, sometimes you just have to say, well, I could totally ignore the comments because they are just so vicious, and they don't give anything. They don't contribute to a proper debate. So I think we always have to be vigilant, and we always have to be prepared to do whatever it takes to protect people. But I don't think that this is something basically wrong with the legislation that we have, but it is really part of a bigger political society and bigger political picture in society that we have to address.
Can I also press you on something? Usually we come, we meet, we have meetings and we have conferences, but there is no follow-up. So can we say that you will be inviting us next year here, and we're going to be sitting and discussing what has happened during the year and what we did right?
I think it's a good idea to make it into something that is... now, how can I answer anything else? I think it's a good idea to turn it into a regular event where at least we do the follow-up and check on the follow-up, that we can see improvements. But I also think it's time for women to stand up and fight and just counter all this hatred and the misogynistic sort of speech that we see, and it's awful how women are pushed back, and we cannot accept this, because from being depressed by everything from some of the leaders' statements that we see in the world today to what we see on social media, I think we just have to say, all right, we have to work even harder, and we just have to organize ourselves, come together, and do these kind of events as well, and find strength in supporting each other.
Thank you. We will be counting on you as a woman. Thank you very, very much. Please, a good applause for the Minister. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.